Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. Um, in this episode, we are starting Descartes and we are also starting, if you're in one of my classes, following at least the 2025, 2024 curriculum, then we're starting our third unit on modern philosophy as well. Um, and this will be the video for just the first meditation. It'll be a little bit about Descartes as well, but then we'll also talk about how. Well, I guess we can talk about that now. The meditations on first philosophy means that um, you could start here, basically. It's from the ground up. Different philosophers have first philosophies. Uh, you could try to do your own first philosophy. Phenomenology is a bit of a first philosophy. Um, and in the bigger context of our course, Descartes will lead us into phenomenology in the continental philosophy section. Descartes' dualism will also serve as the sort of foil for Unit 4 on American pragmatism, where we are looking at monism again. Because Dewey is a monist, he's a continuum thinker who criticizes dualism. Anyway, so there's a couple different reasons that we read Descartes, um, and if it's not clear yet, it's fun to put philosophers together. It's fun to put philosophies together, but sometimes there are differences. Sometimes they take up different positions. Um, it's a worthwhile project that I often pursue to try to understand why the disagreements happen and how to resolve them potentially, or how to read philosophers more charitably. So, along with those, sorry, I bumped the desk. Along with the role that Descartes plays in our course overall, starting the modern philosophy section, um, being the moment that we look at rationalism versus empiricism, uh, we're also going to address in the first meditation um, rational or skeptical doubt, um, rational skepticism, and methodical systematic doubt. There are three or four movements in the doubting stage, in the doubting process. The second one happens twice, but it's kind of still the second one. And we'll talk about that. We'll read the text. It'll be pretty short. Uh, we don't read the dedicatory letter to the Sorbonne. The Sorbonne is like the college of theologians. So it's council of theologian teachers um, studying theology. Anyway, they were like the authorities on God and on religion, and Descartes kind of explains that he wants to prove the soul exists and that God exists, but he wants to prove it in a philosophical way instead of in just a faith-based way. And this is different from the question of like having faith, and obviously, well, not maybe not obviously, but faith very likely has to be something that you don't have evidence for or can't have evidence for. Um, the evidence one way or the other sometimes don't matter if it's a matter of faith. Um, in William James, for example, uh, having faith that you will succeed often leads to success versus believing that you will fail, um, means that you might fail. You might, he talks about a chasm. We'll read. That's in the sentiment of rationality. It's not assigned in my intro course, but I did want to put it in the podcast. So we'll get to that soon, and it's interesting. Anyway, Descartes' purpose is trying to prove these things with arguments that are convincing or intuitively persuasive. Descartes was also a mathematician. If you take an algebra, you might be familiar with the Cartesian plane, the XY coordinates. That's Descartes. He did some other stuff too, I'm sure. I don't know what it was. I haven't read a lot of his other stuff. Um, I've read the Meditations like 4 or 5 times, at least. Way more than that. It's got to be more than that. Um, the dedicatory letter, there's a preface to the reader and a synopsis. I do kind of want to run through the synopsis as we hit each meditation. Um, but it's interesting that the dedicatory letter is like the first page number. It's not part of the preface, it's page one. The meditations as a whole technically starts with it. Um, the meditations is also not really meant to be Descartes' perspective. So when you write your essay, it's best if you write it about Descartes. Um, there's one prompt related to the first meditation, one prompt related to the second meditation, and one prompt related to the third meditation. So I expect probably to be grading a lot of Descartes. Um, but yeah, those will be some options. If you write that prompt, philosophers refer to the narrator or the philosopher in the meditations because it's first philosophy and because it's meant to be anybody that can do it. And you're meant to like go through it on your own and experience these stages on your own. Um, because of that, the I is not Descartes. Whenever you see I this, I that, one, it's supposed to be you and me. And two, each time for each one. And two, uh, it's referred to as the protagonist or the meditator. So either one of those are fine. When you write the essay, just quickly move away from saying Descartes. And if you need to talk about the I or um, the person making the argument, or if you need to talk about the argument with a person at all, you may not need to use a person, right? Um, it's usually best in philosophy to move away from talking about what somebody thought and saying like this person thought this, this person thought that. Um, in constructing a chapter or an argument that combines thinkers, you do mention their names when you start a different section or when you switch back and forth between them. But you should be talking about the ideas more so than what you're talking than you're talking about the person. And the ideas can be mixed together because they don't depend on the person. You're not really making like a historical argument or a biographical argument about what this philosopher thought. You're working um, with just the ideas. So move past saying Descartes, move past saying Bergson, Aristotle, Plato, whoever you write about. Mention their name at first when you're giving context in the introduction. And for the body, just avoid their name altogether and talk about the ideas at hand, which will differ depending on the thing we're reading. Um, which is also why you should use your own examples when you tell the argument. What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? All right, cool. Yeah, if you need to use protagonist or meditator when you're talking about the meditations on first philosophy. Um, it serves as the foundation for phenomenology because it gives us like a first-hand basis for each person to know what it's like to experience truth, just like Bergson pointed us to the intuition of concrete duration, that feeling of my own sense of perception and consciousness and embodiment flowing through time and space, flowing through my life. Descartes gives us a more static version of this with cogito ergo sum, and that's the first instance of knowing what it's like qualitatively or phenomenologically to feel the truth. And when you feel the truth, you can trust it. And that's kind of, I mean, repeatability is great in science and empiricism, but in rationalism, it does come down to a felt. eidetics. And that eidetics, eidetics, um, is what allows phenomenologists to know when they have something worth saying. And because they're researchers, right? So if you're doing research in philosophy, you have to feel or know the truth in some way, and you have to evaluate the truth. You have to discern. Um, at odds or at stakes in the modern philosophy period is this concern with knowing and with the grounds for knowledge. And this is called epistemology. How do we know things? It was there in ancient philosophy too. It was just thought of differently. Right? We talked about it in Bergson. It's a sort of process intuition, an impulse, and an activity. In Plato, it is still, well, it's an activity, but it's a contemplation or a communion with, it's very inactivistic. Um, in Aristotle, it's also inactivistic. In Descartes, it's about, at first, it's still about like that communion with truth, but he wants to prove that statements and other things are possible by the end of the third meditation. And this is my solution to the Cartesian circle. The Cartesian circle is an issue where Descartes uses clarity and distinctness to prove God's existence, and then uses God's existence to prove the infallibility of clarity and distinctness. So it seems circular, but we'll explain why it's not. And that can be one of the prompts that you choose for your exam. Again, in the exam, you don't have to answer every reading from the unit, just one of the readings from the unit. And there's a prompt associated with each reading. So nothing too crazy. Um, so let's finish up the first meditation. We'll talk about the arguments. We will read the text, and yeah, I'll pull it up. Share side by side. So cool. And show meeting, my screen, big, cool. Um, there are a few other guiding questions that aren't on this whiteboard on the Instagram, but this is one of the deeper posts from fall 2024. What is the goal of the meditations? Um, and what I kind of want to do is, so we'll read the synopsis first. We'll look at all the guiding questions. Let's do that first. Let's look at all the guiding questions from the first meditation, and then we'll read the synopsis. And then we'll start reading the first meditation, which is only 4 pages long. It's very short, but we'll find the answers to the guiding questions in order as we read the text. And then we'll reference the kind of Instagram as we do that. Because the Instagram was, sorry, the whiteboard that I put on the Instagram, I had multiple class sections and I did this multiple times with each class and we talked through the answers. And I think that conversation back and forth was really productive for them, no matter what class it was. So we'll try to follow a similar paced method where the guiding questions are coupled alongside the paragraphs instead of up front and then just reading everything. Just integrate it more. Um, can always get better at stuff. I've also put off this recording for a while just because I was very concerned with it being done well. And I just was having like a writer's block or something where I didn't feel like I was quite ready. But we're in it and it's fine. So, synopsis of the following 6 meditations. We're only going to read the first one. But it's fine because I've been thinking about what to do with this. I've been trying to make sure I've got everything to do this. So, I needed to wait to record it. In the first meditation, reasons are provided. This is Descartes writing this original thing, right? He wrote it in cogito ergo sum is actually not in the original meditations. Descartes was a French thinker. This is in 1641, published it. He did a lot of other physics. I think he was interested in optics and sight as well. Kind of interested in biology. He was the first mechanistic thinker to explain the world entirely in terms of cause and effect and mechanical laws of action that could be calculated mathematically. Um, at stake also in the modern period, we will get to the first meditation, I promise. At stake also in the modern period is the modern period is not now, by the way. We're in the contemporary philosophical period. The modern period is basically Descartes, 1600s, early 1600s, um, until 1800. But we'll read Utilitarianism in our modern unit as well, which is by John Stuart Mill. And that was like 1861 or 1864 or something. Um, I can look. 1861. And Descartes was 1641. But Descartes was writing other things before the Meditations on First Philosophy. He wrote the Discourse on Method. Uh, he was interested in emotions. Spinoza, our next thinker, has a sort of is certainly following up on Descartes and is often seen as a Cartesian, but Spinoza is a monistic thinker, and Descartes a dualist. So, and I'm a Spinoza, so I admittedly kind of try to be charitable with Descartes, and I try to read this text in a way that makes sense to me. I'm faithful to the text. I don't read in a lot of other stuff from Descartes. I listen to the objections and replies, um, but I also don't claim to be, a Descartes scholar. I've had teachers who were, really great mentors and teachers who were. Some of them I now work with, and I look up to immensely. But we're going to do our best with Descartes. So he was writing before 1641. The modern period then is basically about 250 years in our books. Most people, I like to really close it with Kant at 1800, but I still like to cover Mill. And so I just kind of pretend that Mill is part of the modern period. He's a little bit later. He's basically the same time as the American Civil War or the um, Communist Manifesto by Marx, 1840s, 1850s. Some of Marx's early writings when he was in his 20s and 30s were the 1844 manuscripts. I think that was his 20s. Um, Focused on estrangement and spiritual uh, humane experiences. Anyway, Descartes, 200 years before that, around the time of there was certainly colonial expeditions from multiple European empires, the Spanish, the Italians, the Portuguese, the French. I think that's all accurate. The English, um, the British, right? British was the biggest one. Anyway, I'm also not an expert in history, but you get the gist. There's a lot of the Industrial Revolution hasn't happened yet. Interchangeable parts haven't happened yet. I don't think textile mills have happened yet. Um, I was reading somewhere that Descartes is supposed to be no, Spinoza is supposed to be. Spinoza was a political thinker too. So we're just kind of getting like an overview of modern philosophy in this. Um, but that's appropriate. So we're going to start with that and then we'll go into again the first meditation. We'll do them in the same video, the same episode. Spinoza coming like 50 years, 20, 30, 50 years after, like when was the Ethics? The Ethics was I don't have that here either. Sorry, I try to keep the original dates on there. Yeah. Somebody's listening. Why do you know that, Google? 1677. And I should know that. Let me add it to my uh software, my code real quick. I'm not gonna launch it, but I'll fix it for later. So the next time I upload something, it is there. Um, so like when I upload this episode, it'll be there afterwards. Okay. What's that? Got more light on my face now. We're back to the white background instead of the black background. Um, what was that? So yeah, Spinoza coming 20, 30 years later. Really a lot of overlap in their lifespan. They both Spinoza died at 40. Descartes died at I think 57. I think he was 1597 to 1654. Um, that's right. I'm not going to check it. Yeah. But anyway, to put it into context, Descartes led to Spinoza. Descartes led to a lot of other things important for phenomenology. Um, Rationalism, the idea that we can know things as true for ourselves. Um, I think, therefore I am. That's what cogito ergo sum translates to. That's what I was going to say. So Descartes was French. Spinoza was Dutch. Spinoza wrote in Latin, or at least the Ethics were in Latin. Descartes also wrote in Latin. And I think eventually there were like French translations. And there's one, this is really more meditations too territory, second meditation territory. But it's not the French translation. I think it's the Discourse on Method, which was written in French. No, 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 no. The Discourse is the one where he says, it's in the introduction. It's Je pense donc je suis, but I'm pretty sure it's in the Discourse. The original French phrase in the Discourse is Je pense donc je suis. This is XXIX of the general introduction of the Cambridge text version, which is kind of like the CSM, Cottingham, Studhoff, and Murdoch. So cogito ergo sum is in Principles of Philosophy and in the subsequent Latin discourse. So Je pense donc je suis in the French was translated when it became Latin, it was translated into cogito ergo sum. But it's not in the Meditations on First Philosophy. In the second meditation, he says something like, when I put forth the proposition, I am thinking I exist. The way that I like to parse that move into from doubt into certainty is doubting that you're doubting, because then you know at least you're doing something. Um, and one way or another, you have to be doing something. So in the first meditation, we'll look at three reasons for doubt, three and a half. The second one is kind of twice repeated. It has the same one repeated again. Um, it's got two steps to it. And then the third reason also has two steps to it. And ideally, in your introduction, you should talk about what the purpose of the meditations is and um, why it's sufficient to doubt instead of just proving something is false, and also why Descartes is looking for systematic things instead of finding a way to doubt every single thing. That would be good for an introduction or a first paragraph. And then like the rest of the prompt would obviously the structure of the first meditation, the rest of it is the three reasons for doubt. And just read those 4 pages until you can see that structure. Um, and kind of make each point its own paragraph, right? So Descartes wrote in the synopsis on page 9, which is it's on the website version, the annotated version, but it's not in the class version if you're in one of my classes. It's in your annotations in class too, but it's not the blank version that you can print out and use in your exam. Um, you can mark up the one that you print out, right? It just needs to be blank when you print it, and then you write stuff on it. In the first meditation, reasons are provided which give us possible grounds for doubt about all things, especially material things, so long as we have no foundations for the sciences other than those which we have had up till now. Although the usefulness of such extensive doubt is not apparent at first sight, its greatest benefit lies in freeing us from all our preconceived opinions and providing the easiest route by which the mind may be led away from the senses. The eventual result of this doubt is to make it impossible for us to have any further doubts about what we subsequently discover to be true. All right, that's Descartes' one paragraph explanation of the purpose of the first meditation. Um, Descartes says in his letter to the Sorbonne that the faculty of the Sorbonne that he doesn't list every possible argument he could think of because he's not really trying to persuade somebody who doesn't want to be persuaded. He says he lists the best argument or an exemplary argument for each point along the way. And if you really think about it and if you're honest with yourself, supposedly it'll make sense. And supposedly you'll be like, yeah, okay, this is right. Um, if he's either convinced that that's just true, which as a rationalist, that's probably what it is. He probably is convinced of that. But the other aspect of it is that he's not going to waste his breath or his time trying to convince people that aren't listening. Um, cool. So our guiding questions for the first meditation are: one, what is the goal of the protagonist of the meditations? Two, why does doubt function the same as disproving inherited beliefs? Three, what are the three reasons for skepticism of all inherited belief? And four, how is the evil deceiver a rhetorical device without argumentative work? So this is the one that always trips people up. It's a good way to lose credit on the exam if you aren't careful about the third reason. The third reason is a case argument. I've already kind of talked about this in an announcement if you're in my original class for online. In later semesters, I may not mention it in an announcement, so it's important to say it here. But or if you didn't read the announcement in full, you didn't catch that part, you forgot it, whatever. It's cool. You can't say it enough. The third reason for doubt is not the evil deceiver. The evil deceiver is a way to capture all of the reasons for doubt all at once. And they are kind of wider doubts. The second reason, I don't know that it like isn't it expands the circle of what can be doubted, but I don't know that it takes up the mantle of what came before. Um, the evil deceiver, on the other hand, is meant to take up the mantle of all the other three reasons. And it comes in after Descartes explains that, or the protagonist explains that I am prone to my habits and my ways of seeing the world. And it's very hard, even though I have good reasons to doubt everything, it's very hard to remember those reasons immediately. So the evil deceiver is like a way to like really trick yourself. Trick the meditator is trying to trick themselves. The protagonist is trying to trick themselves. So that they can have a firm foundation for the sciences, like we already saw. So what is the goal of the protagonist of the meditations? Well, um, so long as we have no foundations for the sciences other than those which we have had up till now. Um, he isn't quite saying there what the purpose is, but the purpose is to ground science. He's saying here that if there is no ground for science, then we can't trust anything else, or that we have these doubts are still there for us. Once we have science, supposedly these doubts are not there for us. And we need God for science, for Descartes. Because you have to have faith that the world will continue to be the same world, and the things that you once knew were true will continue to be true. The things that you once perceived as stable, you actually did perceive them. Your memory's not lying to you. All of these things. So then we'll go down to the first meditation and we'll just start chewing on it. Um, what is the goal of meditations? To go over preconceived notions, start over from scratch, to find certainty and stability in the sciences. And once in the course of the meditator's life, to sufficiently late age, I think he's in his 40s at this point. He's 44. Um, when he's at a place where he won't hurt anybody by doing so, to not really deconstruct, but find a way to doubt everything, um, so that he can find stability afterwards. Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary, once in the course of my life, to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations, if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. All right, so there's our first answer. What's the second question? Why does doubt function the same as disproving inherited beliefs? But the task looked an enormous one, and I began to wait until I should reach a mature enough age to ensure that no subsequent time of life would be more suitable for tackling such inquiries. This led me to put the project off for so long that I would not be to blame if by pondering over it any further I wasted the time still left for carrying it out. So today I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I am here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. So not deconstruction, but demolition. Deconstruction is a specific process involving two poles of a supposed dyad or conflict or two opposites, and crossing over from each opposite into the other to show the ways in which the opposites depend on each other to construct each other. Um, in a way that the deconstruction, which is not really what Descartes is doing at all, the deconstruction is from Derrida in the late 20th century, 300 years after Descartes. I think he does like Descartes. Um, I think Derrida might be a dualist. I don't remember. There's a lot of parallelism in his thinking. I think he tends more towards keeping those um, tensions at play instead of utterly resolving them. Okay, back at it. Demolition. So why does doubt function the same as disproving inherited beliefs? Well, because if you can doubt it, then there's a little bit of a reason why it's not certain or true. Um, if it's not absolutely steadfast, absolutely rock solid, absolutely without a doubt, absolutely trustworthy, absolutely safe, whatever, there's a little crack in it. There's some doubt. There's a possibility. It's not deductively necessary or certain. It is contingent. Um, Fleeting, non-essential. All very important, supposedly, um, supposedly all of these aspects or characteristics relate to and improve each other, right? Necessity and contingency. Doubt, possibility, certainty, ground. And how do we go from a perception of truth to something that's certain, that grounded? Something that just feels true to actually knowing that it's true, right? Something we believe to something we know. But to accomplish this, it will not be necessary for me to show that all my opinions are false, which is something I could perhaps never manage. So this is technically the answer to a different question that I haven't asked yet. Um, a question not listed in the guiding questions, and maybe I'll add it to it. I probably will put it in with the podcast details. Um, I can go ahead and pull it up to edit it. But the question is, why doesn't Descartes have to disprove every single belief individually? And that's what he answers for us next. That's the next step in his argument or the presentation of his thinking. Let me just pull up the guiding questions document and get it updated. So why does the protagonist not have to doubt every single individually? And the answer to this is the systemic aspect of the doubt. Which is, it will not be necessary, but to accomplish this, it will not be necessary for me to show that all my opinions are false, which is something I could perhaps never manage. Reason now leads me to think that I should hold back my assent from opinions which are not completely certain and indubitable, just as carefully as I do from those which are patently false. So this was the question we just asked, number two. And then, so for the purpose of rejecting all my opinions, it will be enough if I find in each of them at least some reason for doubt. Still the answer to number two. And to do this, I will not need to run through them all individually, which would be an endless task. So this next question, right? That first one, the one we were just, the first half of this paragraph, second paragraph, is about why is it enough to just doubt when you're trying to find certainty and you're trying to shake the foundations of certainty to make sure that you have it. And the second half of this paragraph is the answer to the third guiding question, which is why does the protagonist not have to doubt every single belief individually? Once the foundations of a building are undermined, anything built on them collapses of its own accord. So I will go straight for the basic principles on which all my former beliefs rested. All right, so now we're on the three reasons for doubt. And the three reasons for doubt are the senses. That's the first one. And I like to think of like what still cannot be doubted. So just at a very basic level, the first one is that everything I have received through the senses is sometimes false, but there are still some things I can't doubt, like having a body or things that are like up close immediately in front of me, like this desk, this book, this fire, this window, the animals, my breathing. I should certainly not doubt that I'm breathing because if I stop breathing, I would pass out. At the very least, I might die. And I can assume that I might die, even though I can never know that without actually dying. Um, But yeah, he doesn't trust the senses. The protagonist does not trust the senses. She does not trust the senses. Um, But there are still some things that I can't doubt, like having a body and being close and being in an environment. If I was in a classroom with students, I would say that we're in a classroom together right now, that you are listening to this video right now. Um, the second doubt is dual staged, but he briefly passes over the madman argument. That's really not a doubt. Um, and instead he uses the dream as a proxy for the madman argument because if you process the madman argument, you just can't trust anything you're saying anymore. And you can never really get out of it. It's just sort of intractable, meaning there's no traction, there's no ground, there's no processing, there's no clawing, there's no teeth to latch onto to get it moving, to roll it. So he skips over the madman argument. But dreaming is something that might, make sense to us, still within the bounds of reason. Um, I could be dreaming right now. There are plenty of times where I don't realize I'm dreaming or think that I'm dreaming. And by the way, with the first argument, we'll read it with the first step of the doubt, the senses. He doesn't exactly mention things like towers far away or um, a stick looking different in water. These show up online a lot, but they're not in the text. When we read it, you won't see them. Bodies which are very small or in the distance. So the real example that he has here is the sun. Um, like we think the sun is very small, but mathematically we can know that it's massive. It has to be, given the distance. And this is the truest kind of idea for Descartes. It's an innate idea. So that'll come up in the third meditation when we're looking at his schema of ideas, which is part of his argument for God's existence, or part of the meditator's argument for God's existence. Supposedly anybody could follow this argument and find it reasonable. Um, yeah, and this is really similar to Plato in the seventh book of the Republic, where he says that there are summoners sometimes in sense perception which summon opposite or contradictory reports. So, like a stick in water would be one of these, where it feels straight but looks crooked. Or um, when something is small, but we can get close to it and we see that it's bigger. Okay. And then the second doubt, right, is dreaming. So let's pull up the board. So the second reason, the second question, doubt is enough because it's skepticism is enough to chip away at the certainty of inherited beliefs and striking and undercutting the foundations for sweeping groups of belief. All right, cool. What are the reasons for doubt? So the sense says things that are small and far away, or when they're far away. And I still can't doubt immediate experience like body and environment, right? The size of things, proportionality, those reports, those aspects of the sense might be wrong in certain ways, but I should certainly still believe in the existence of certain things. Okay, the next level, awake, um, versus dreaming, and this is the proxy for the madman argument. But he says that you still can't doubt um general kinds of things. So just like a painter, even if I might be dreaming, the things that I notice in dreams, they are based on things from real life. They take up the forms, my imagination takes on the forms of objects which exist in an external world, supposedly. It's when I'm awake, this is the world I experience. And you can see the case argument here, the third reason for doubt, which is far more complicated than just an evil deceiver. It's not the evil deceiver at all. Um, but just like a painter who takes colors or scenes from life that may or may not have happened and creates them, the dream might still be doing that. And there must be that real thing out there, that real color, that real foundation, hands, eyes, general sorts of things, some kind of universal. But then Descartes does this again a second time, and he goes from breaking down like hands must exist and bodies must exist to particles must exist, more or less. Um, he says that compound sciences are not trustworthy, but basic sciences like arithmetic, geometry are. So I might not have a body, but 2 plus 3 equals 5 is still sound. That's still true. And a square still has 4 sides, and a triangle still has 3 sides. For Descartes, the idea has everything in it, and you could unpack an idea to get out the rest of the details of it. I believe this is at least what Kant calls analytic, that the information is there in a different way in the idea already. And when you do the analytic of something, or when you analyze it, you're breaking down what's there. And Bergson shows us that analysis is just really one breakdown, one perspective of what's there for the whole moving relationality. Anyway, Descartes. In order to doubt these mathematical truths, it's necessary to get to a more foundational level that just obliterates everything. And if God exists, then he does this with the case argument. And the case argument means that he's going to start from two opposite positions and show that they each lead to the same conclusion. And so it doesn't matter if that position is true, because the conclusion will be true either way. And so he starts from whether God exists to show that I might be wrong about everything. And the meditator, she also starts from God does not exist to show how she might be wrong, or I might be wrong about everything all the time. Still, it's not that God might be deceiving me. That's a different, that plays a different role in the first meditation. Um, Basically, his argument is one sentence. It's half a sentence. It's after a semicolon, I think. Uh, it's a sentence. So the argument is just simply that um we might think that it contradicts God's goodness for me to make mistakes all the time or be wrong about everything, for me to be like that nothing exists, that everything is false, that everything is a lie. We might think that would make God evil, that God would have to be a deceiver for that kind of confusion to happen, where the words coming out of my mouth are not true. I do not know them. I do not speak them. They are not mine. I do not exist. These things. That level of foundational doubt. Um, it does not require an evil deceiver. An omnibenevolent God is consistent with going wrong at that foundational level because it's just a more extreme version of being wrong about small things. And we had to make mistakes and learn from our mistakes. We had to learn at a young age that 2 plus 3 equals 5. We had to learn things. We got things wrong sometimes. I certainly have. And if I don't think it contradicts God's goodness when I get small things wrong, then I have no ground to think that it contradicts God's goodness at a more extreme case to happen all the time about more foundational things. So there's no safeguard there if God does exist, even if God does exist. Not until a third meditation, when we can prove that God is guaranteeing clarity and distinctness through God's existence and God's goodness. And so we have to look at that argument. But even before, what Descartes says is that there are certain truths that reveal themselves to us. They cannot be doubted. They are innate. They are revealed by the natural light. We're still in doubt. We don't want to get too far into that, but that's where we're headed. Anyway, right now, if God exists, I might still be wrong about everything. It doesn't make God bad, and it's not the evil deceiver. If God does not exist, then I was made by random chances. And there's this sort of vicious cycle kind of pulling me to the bottom, via my mistakes. The fact that I've made some mistakes again means that whatever made me was not perfect, because if it was perfect, I wouldn't, well, not necessarily, because God could exist and God could have made me and God is perfect, and that doesn't make God imperfect for me to not be perfect. But I can't be more perfect than my cause for Descartes. There must be at least as much reality or goodness in the cause as in the effect. And this might be the way the argument goes. If I'm the cause of things and I make mistakes, well, then we're really screwed because I made mistakes. I'm not perfect, and everything that I cause cannot be more perfect than me. Um, so either way, it's possible that the meditator goes wrong all the time. And the last page of the 4 pages, that's the second and third page, basically, right there. We'll read them. Let's go ahead and read them, and then we'll wrap up with the evil deceiver and the fourth question about why it's a rhetorical device to trick the meditator, the protagonist, into quickly remembering that they can't trust anything. And I'll show you in the text the key moments where the language really makes clear that it's a different stage happening. Multiple sentences in the text saying, I have good reasons to doubt everything before we ever talk about the evil deceiver. Okay, so we're going to start at the top with all 3 reasons for doubt in the original text. So the first one, whatever I have up till now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from the senses or through the senses. But from time to time, I have found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. Yet, although the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is quite impossible, even though they are derived from the senses. So here we've already got our first doubt and our first kind of flip where we're talking about what we still can't doubt, which prods us or develops us along to the second doubt. So even though they're derived from the senses, for example, so he's already said again above that we can doubt that the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance. That we can doubt. But we cannot doubt that I'm here sitting by the fire in front of a camera recording on my laptop, wearing a winter dressing gown, not wearing a winter dressing gown, holding this piece of paper in my hands. I'm wearing like just normal pants and a shirt. Um, Holding this piece of paper in my hands and so on. Again, how can it be denied that these hands or this whole body are mine? So, like I said, this is what I've just said. Unless perhaps I were to liken myself to madmen, whose brains are so damaged by the persistent vapors of melancholia, they firmly maintain they are kings when they are paupers, or say they are dressed in purple when they are naked, or that their heads are made of earthenware, or that they are pumpkins or made of glass. But such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So it's just intractable. You can't continue to develop a rational doubt through the kind of doubt that you get from madmen, from being insane. But instead, we use the proxy of dreaming, a brilliant piece of reasoning, as if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do when awake. Indeed, sometimes even more improbable ones. How often asleep at night am I convinced of just such familiar events, that I am here in my dressing gown, sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying undressed in bed, having a dream. Yet at the moment my eyes are certainly wide awake when I look at this piece of paper. I shake my head and it is not asleep. As I stretch out and feel my hand, I do so deliberately, and I know what I am doing. All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. Indeed, as if I did not remember other occasions when I have been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. The result is that I begin to feel dazed, and this very feeling only reinforces the notion that I may be asleep. Suppose, then, that I am dreaming, and that these particulars, that my eyes are open, that I am moving my head and stretching out my hands, are not true. Perhaps, indeed, I do not even have such hands or such a body at all. Nonetheless, it must surely be admitted that the visions which come in sleep are like paintings, which must have been fashioned in the likeness of things that are real, and hence that at least these general kinds of things, eyes, head, hands, and the body as a whole, are things which are not imaginary but are real and exist. So you could really make a fourth stage here. You could say there's sense doubt, there's dreaming doubt, there's the moment of the painter. There's really multiple moments in the text. It's hard to say that there are different reasons for doubting. Um, really the next reason for doubting is that it still kind of comes out of the dream argument. It comes out of our intuition that when we were dreaming, it was based on the likeness of the real world. Um, the visions which come in sleep are like paintings which must have been fashioned. The painter argument is really still a way to develop the second reason for doubt. Which must have, but it's another moment in the text. It's an additional moment, which must have been fashioned in the likeness of things that are real, and hence that at least these general kinds of things, eyes, head, hands, and the body as a whole, are things which are not imaginary but are real and exist. For even when painters try to create sirens and satires with the most extraordinary bodies, they cannot give them natures which are new in all respects. They simply jumble up the limbs of different animals. Or if perhaps they manage to think up something different, something so new that nothing remotely similar has ever been seen before, something which is therefore completely fictitious and unreal, at least the colors used in the composition must be real. By similar reasoning, although these general kinds of things, eyes, head, hands, and so on, could be imaginary, it must at least be admitted that certain other, even simpler and more universal things are real. These are, as it were, the real colors from which we form all the images of things, whether true or false, that occur in our thought. This class appears to include corporeal nature in general and its extension, the shape of extended things, the quantity or size and number of these things, the place in which they may exist, the time through which they may endure, and so on. So a reasonable conclusion from this might be that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other disciplines which depend on the study of composite things are doubtful, while arithmetic, geometry, and other subjects of this kind, which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether they really exist in nature or not, contain something certain and indubitable. For whether I am awake or asleep, 2 and 3 added together are 5, and a square has no more than 4 sides. It seems impossible that such transparent truth should incur any suspicion of being false. So we finished the third reason for doubt. We've talked about what we still can't doubt. And now we're going to we covered the first two reasons. We're going to cover the third reason. And yet firmly rooted in my mind is the long-standing opinion that there is an omnipotent God who made me the kind of creature that I am. How do I know that he has not brought it about that there is no earth, no sky, no extended thing, no shape, no size, no place, while at the same time ensuring that all these things appear to me to exist just as they do now? So this isn't deception. This is just And it may not even be direct activity or responsibility. It might just be the state of affairs. What is more, just as I consider that others sometimes go astray in cases where they think they have the most perfect knowledge, how do I know that God has not brought it about that I too go wrong every time I add 2 and 3, or count the sides of a square, or in some even simpler matter, if that is imaginable? And here's the actual argument. But perhaps God would not have allowed me to be deceived in this way, since he is said to be supremely good. But it doesn't contradict God's goodness. It doesn't make God evil for me to be wrong about things that sometimes, and so it doesn't make God evil to be wrong for me to be wrong about things all the time. But if it were inconsistent with his goodness to have created me such that I am deceived all the time, it would seem equally foreign to his goodness to allow me to be deceived even occasionally. Yet this last assertion cannot be made. Perhaps there may be some who would prefer to deny the existence of so powerful a God rather than believe that everything else is uncertain. So this is the other half of the argument, the situation if God does not exist. Let us not argue with them, but grant them that everything said about God is a fiction. According to their supposition, then I have arrived at my present state by fate or chance or a continuous chain of events, or by some other means. Yet, since deception and error seem to be imperfections, the less powerful they make my original cause. And because I cannot be any more powerful than my cause, then the more likely it is that I am so imperfect as to be deceived all the time. I have no answer to these arguments, but am finally compelled to admit that there is not one of my former beliefs about which doubt may not properly be raised. And this is not a flippant or ill-considered conclusion, but is based on powerful and well thought out reasons. So he's settled. He's got the argument locked, or the protagonist, she's got the argument locked. I've got the argument locked at this stage. So in future, I must withhold my assent from these former beliefs, just as carefully as I would from obvious falsehoods if I want to discover any certainty. But it is not enough merely to have noticed this. I must make an effort to remember it. My habitual opinions keep coming back, and despite my wishes, they capture my belief, which is, as it were, bound over to them as a result of long occupation and the law of custom. I shall never get out of the habit of confidently assenting to these opinions, so long as I suppose them to be what in fact they are, namely highly probable opinions. So it's still saying, she's still saying that even though I have reasons for doubt, they're probably still true. Opinions which, despite the fact that they are in a sense doubtful, as has just been shown, it is still much more reasonable to believe them to deny. In view of this, I think it will be a good plan to turn my will in completely the opposite direction and deceive myself right? By pretending for a time that these former opinions are utterly false and imaginary. I shall do this until the weight of preconceived opinion is counterbalanced, and the distorting influence of habit no longer prevents my judgment from perceiving things correctly. In the meantime, I know that no danger or error will result from my plan, and that I cannot possibly go too far in my distrustful attitude. Since I've locked myself away, this is because the task now in hand does not involve action, but merely the acquisition of knowledge, meditation, contemplation on this first philosophy. I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, and who has already done argumentative work along the way to show me that I cannot trust with certainty of anything at all, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. This is the rhetorical device, the thing that's meant to trick myself, to deceive myself. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams, which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands, or eyes, or flesh, or blood, or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all these things. And this is the answer to the fourth question. How is the evil deceiver a rhetorical device without argumentative work? Well, you show that the argument was closed. You show that Descartes or the meditator needs to trick themselves, that they committed to tricking themselves. And then you show that it's all chronological, like that in the flow of the text at the next moment, then the deceiver is introduced. Um, as falsely believing that I have all these things, I shall stubbornly and firmly persist in this meditation. And even if it is not in my power to know any truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is, resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehoods, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. But this is an arduous undertaking, and a kind of laziness brings me back to normal life. I am like a prisoner who is enjoying an imaginary freedom while asleep. As he begins to suspect that he is asleep, he dreads being woken up and goes along with the pleasant illusion as long as he can. In the same way, I happily slide back into my old opinions, and dread being shaken out of them, for fear that my peaceful sleep may be followed by hard labor when I wake up, and that I shall have to toil not in the light, but amid the inextricable darkness of the problems I have now raised. All right, that's the end of the first meditation. Um, Animals are all resting. Sophia's under my desk. I've got my mom's dog with me right now, and Winchester and her in bed asleep. Oh, he heard his name and he's kind of like doing like that. Rolled over on his back a little bit, kind of stretched out. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the first meditation. We'll pick it up in the next episode. Um, what I will say is like it follows a pretty consistent pattern in philosophy of knowing when you can't know something and wanting to withhold assent. Assent is kind of like consent, but it means to believe or to sort of relinquish a belief, um, to attest, or it has a sort of relinquishing feel. It's kind of like you're letting your guard down and trusting it. It's sort of like trust in a belief, um, faith in a belief. So yeah, assent. It's important in philosophy to withhold assent. It's something we repeatedly learn. Socrates and Plato both. Socrates at the Apology, Socrates with the Socratic method of asking other people questions to show them why they believe may be wrong. And Plato, in the overall picture of his canon, in the early dialogues, just follows the Socratic method, and in the middle and late dialogues has better answers once we've figured out what we can't trust. In the Republic in particular, the first book of the Republic is all about dismantling, critiquing, taking apart, doubting different conceptions of justice. And then the argument evaluates or starts to purport some things to be true. We start to figure out what we can trust. In Plato's cave, we start out in a position where we realize all of a sudden that we were wrong about things. And so we start doubting and we stop trusting the things we formerly thought. And then we come to knowledge again. It's a repeated journey of doubting ourselves and figuring new things out. Repeatedly important to know when we can't know something. Kant tries to say that there are certain things we can't know and doesn't give us answers. Descartes does it too. Um, some contemporary philosophers have argued that Descartes, that the Meditations on First Philosophy is a sort of modern, right, 1640 retelling of the cave. Descartes also trying to, at the same time that he is trying to make the soul eternal, make God rational and real, he's also trying to make science less mystical and more mechanistic. Galileo was, I forgot to say this at the beginning of our video, so I need to cover it still. Galileo was, I think he was excommunicated and maybe put under house arrest. I don't think he was killed. Um, and when that happened, Descartes put off any plans to publish a book that he was working on that proved the role was mechanistic. Um, and yeah, the alternative to the dualism were the mind is separate is that mind is a property of matter. Not a property per se, but it's the phenomenal experience or the conscious experience, the sense experience, the color, the sound, all that stuff is there in matter itself. It's not like that for Descartes. It is in the second meditation where all the experience is still a form of thinking. And he says that insofar as it's not considered as thinking, it's not, well, now we're getting into the second meditation. So stay tuned. That'll be in the next episode. But I wanted you guys to know about like kind of the context of the political context of what Descartes can and can't say. Um, but now we're in the meditations and we're meditators. So we're not worried about Descartes. We're not worried about his political position. We're not worried about what he's avoiding saying or what he's forced to say. Like maybe he doesn't believe in God. Maybe he's just saying that to protect his butt. We're not doing that. We're taking him at his word, taking the arguments at their word, and we're processing what the arguments mean as meditators, as protagonists doing first philosophy. And that's really what it should always be, is what we try to make it. There's always going to be some influence of history, and our perceptions are always historically influenced, but to the best of our ability, we should be charitable and read in good faith, and try to understand what they're saying. So I will wrap this up. I didn't expect it to be an hour and 11 minutes. I think it was just super thorough. I don't think there's nearly that much to cover in the second or the third meditations. So hopefully it doesn't take as long. Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon. Uh, I hope you keep checking in. So take care. If you're in one of my classes, just let me know if you need anything, reach out, send me an email to whatever university email address I work with you through, or on our learning management software, Canvas in this case. Um, I usually don't say that in the podcast because it's for a more general audience. And but in future semesters, still, you're welcome to, if you're one of my students in an institutional setting, you're welcome to contact me. If you want to collaborate with me, you're welcome to contact me. But I have a limited amount of that I can do to teach people that I are just outside of this. So thanks again. See you soon. Bye. I think that's everything. Um, Take a look at the Instagram to look at the case argument if it's still not clear. Assert is to claim, and then assent is to willfully agree, like we were talking about. And it's withholding assent, supposing and pretending to trick oneself, away from the long, powerful law of custom and habitual opinions. So it's one answer. Why does doubt function the same as disproving inherited beliefs? Because -1% is still not 100%. You can think of it in percentages. All right, that should be enough. See you guys. Bye.